Hello, everyone, and welcome to this online conversation for the Brisbane Writers Festival. My name is Michaela Kalowski, and it's my great pleasure to be here tonight or today, wherever you're watching from, in conversation with David Mitchell. I wanted to start, hello, David, by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I'm on tonight, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where the Brisbane Writers Festival is. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are watching this evening or today, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Just a bit of housekeeping. Today, I'm going to speak with David for about 40 minutes, and then we'll leave good 15 minutes for your questions through, and you can put those questions to David through either the YouTube live chat function, or if you're on Facebook, via Facebook Messenger on the Brisbane Writers Festival page. And I also want to let you know that tonight's event is being recorded. Before I start the conversation with David Mitchell, though, I wanted to tell you a little bit about him, just in case you don't know his full and extraordinary biography. David Mitchell is an award-winning and best-selling author of 9 works of fiction, the latest of which is Utopia Avenue. He's been twice shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize and was named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine in 2007.
Sorry, it's still... I can't keep a straight face.
His work has been translated into 36 languages. You've only got to bear a little bit more of it, I promise, David. And his novels have sold over 2.5 million copies. With Keiya Yoshida, David also co-translated from the Japanese the international best-selling memoir, The Reason I Jump. He's also written opera libretti and co-wrote scenes in Kate Bush's live set Before the Dawn. His writing has been described as zigzagging across the globe, across centuries, skipping from genre to genre with a restless, open-hearted intelligence. He performs mind-bending experiments with structure, narrative, with language, with genre, stretching the novel to its outer limits. Whether you've read all of his novels or only a few, it's fair to say that his novels come back again and again to some central questions: how humans are connected and how their actions are interconnected. Utopia Avenue contains these elements and takes us into the world of a psychedelic blues rock band in London in the late 1960s. It's a story about the cost of fame, the mayhem of being in a band, sanity, sex and love, freedom, and what circumstances or forces help creativity to flourish and to influence us. Welcome, David.
Oh, well, thank you, Michaela. That was a work of art. I didn't mean any disrespect by laughing. It's just I can still hear I can still imagine my wife and my mum, how they howled with laughter when I told them about the time. You're not even the most influential person in the house. I'm kind of like number 5 after the kids and the washing machine.
Superb. I think if anyone's allowed to laugh at your credits, it's you.
Thank you. But even if I don't quite know where to look, then thank you.
Very welcome. I'm going to jump right in, and I'm going to start with talking to you about Utopia Avenue, your superb and sublime new book about rock and roll, about a lot of things, but in part about this extraordinary band called Utopia Avenue. And there's a great line that's attributed to many people over decades, that writing about music is like dancing about architecture. It's a very, very hard thing to do, but you've done it. And I wanted you to talk to us a bit tonight about how. Where did you start writing about a band?
Well, thank you. And thanks for the kind things you say about my writing in your question. I suppose there's the why and the how. The why is, like all of us, most of us, I have a lifelong relationship with music. It changes down the decades according to who I am and perhaps what the music is, and even more prosaic things like the way that we listen to and get music. It's probably our first art form. We probably hear it in our mother's wombs with the drum and bass track of our heartbeats underlying it. Then it's perhaps the first art form at kindergarten that really sinks its magical hooks into us. It may just be the wheels on the bus go round and round, but it's undeniably there, and it becomes a part of our mental furniture really early on. Later, in teenage years, it can provide us with an identity, with a tribe, with answers with answers to the questions. Well, if I'm not listening to Wheels on the Bus anymore, what am I listening to, and who am I? If I'm not a kid anymore, it's a mirror in which, rather like a Zoom screen, in which we can see, but a digitally enhanced Zoom screen where we see alternative versions of ourselves, maybe versions we prefer to the one in the deep, dark, truthful mirror, to quote Elvis Costello for any real music heads out there. Then we learn that music is a mood-enhancing drug. It can alter our endocrinological output. It can generate dopamine. It can generate adrenaline. Just these sound waves in the air. How on earth does it do that? What's going on with that? It's just vibrating molecules. Yet it makes the hairs on the backs of our necks stand up. How and why? Music, like poetry, can articulate things that we have felt but have never seen articulated before. But it's not whole. Songs use words, but of course they're not only words. There's the music there as well. There's this beautiful intermarriage between sound and words. Later on, when you're my age, music is also a time machine, and you can play a song which I first heard 3/4 of my lifetime ago, cycling back from Malvern with this album in a plastic bag over the handlebars of my bike, flapping my knee, and me not wanting to crumple the cardboard of the cover too much, and I'd get back and I'd put the record on. And now when I play that record, aged 51, I'm back there in the room instantly. It's like Proust's. It's a sonic version of Proust's Madeleine. All the details in the room on that particular morning where I first heard whatever it was, Moving Pictures by Rush would have been one of those albums. I'm just kind of back there, and I remember all sorts of things I didn't even know I'd forgotten. So music's many things. What a relationship we have with it. It's so many things. Almost, why would I not want to write about that? If that's not a novel-worthy topic, what is? Of course, there's an infinity of novel-worthy topics, but in that I was thinking about this anyway, why not write a book about it? That's the why. The how, yes, dancing around architecture. I tried to do it by mobilizing all of the things that a novel is made of: plot, character, structure, themes or ideas, style or language, into and structure. If I didn't say structure, I tried to work out how these could be musical. So the characters, everyone's in a music world. Most people are in a music world. Or the book is experienced by people who are thinking about music or recording it or managing bands or writing it or playing it on the radio. Or just obsessive about it. Plot, sure, easy, set in the music world. The rise and, well, the ascent up the wobbly ladder of stardom, as all rock and roll novels are. There's only one plot, and then a reason why we haven't heard of them, which has to come at the end. Of course, there's only one plot is also a statement you could apply to the procedural drama, or to the science fiction voyage through space, or to kids studying magic at a school for wizards, or to the spy novel. I mean, yes, there's only one overplot, but then the point is to kind of implode the cliches and to find little hidden chambers in the one plot, and to try to plot a course that you might not have seen so often, or ideally ever. The themes and ideas, well, if you have characters who are thinking about music all day, then who better to articulate ideas about music plausibly than them? Structure. I've structured the novel as not as a book really, but as 3 albums. It's the 3 albums that Utopia Avenue make, and each chapter is a track on those albums. And you can sort of, and so I could use that structure just to show how a songwriter or any creative artist will just take bits and pieces that are lying around your day or your week or your life. And try to avoid the word inspiration, because kind of a little part of me dies inside whenever I use the word, but I can't really. So things that inspire songs. And that is pretty much the how I tried, at least.
It's a very, very good answer. Thank you. I want to talk to you a bit about language. You're known throughout a lot of your different works. I'm thinking of the Thousand Autumns of Jacob de Zoet is a good example, where your ability to take us to a place in time, but also to so carefully have thought about the language that people speak, the way in which that language indicates their class, the way in which that language indicates their gender, all those aspects of language. But I wanted to ask you how you thought about the use of language in this book, when so much of it is about describing, as you've said so beautifully, describing the feeling that music gives us, where music is wordless for the most part, but you're using words, and they are a way of, music is sound. Words are sound. Words have texture.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered if you had some reflections on that you could share about the way in which you had to think carefully about the kind of language you used from album to album and track to track in the book.
Sure. There's a sort of there's a macro answer and a micro answer. The macro answer on the bigger scale is it's to do with voice. It's to do with who is speaking. There's a musical analog. Late Bob Dylan sounds entirely different to early Nina Simone. There's no way you could possibly confuse them. Similarly, I think it's a novelist's job to endow characters with their voice, their individual voices. The alternative is being stuck in that scene in Being John Malkovich, where everyone is John Malkovich and everyone's talking in the same Malkovich voice, saying the same word, Malkovich. I always felt a little bit fraudulent accepting praise for doing this. It's simply a novelist's job. It's sort of like praising a portrait artist for saying, "Oh yeah, you've kind of this person in the frame. It looks just like the person that it's a painting." Well, of course, it's sort of. If I don't get that right, I'm not doing my job properly. It's not necessarily easy, but you think about it, and over the course of books and years, there is a skill there. You hone, you think about the character's relationship with language. What is their voice? What's their background? Are they from a bookish, wordy background where say as kids they would have been praised for learning words like mellifluous or quotidian or xenophobic? Or are they from a background where using that kind of language would have got you a clip round the ear for speaking posh or having ideas above your station? And how has that impacted their life? So Dean, the bassist in the band, who's a working class boy, he can't talk like Jasper. And if I needed Dean to use the word mellifluous, unless I'm feeding in extenuating circumstances, like he just heard it a few pages ago, or there's actually a case in point in this with the word nihilistic. He hears it, he doesn't quite know what it means, and it's a few hundred pages before he actually says, "So this word, what does it actually mean?" His relationship with language is different to Jaspers, the Sid Barrety public school educated, and being in the UK, of course, that means a private school educated, or Elf, the keyboard player, who's upper middle class girl, a daughter of a bank manager. They can use high register vocabulary without embarrassment and without me needing to smoosh it up a bit. John Lydon, aka Johnny Rotten, is interesting. He's a working class kid with quite an extensive literary vocabulary, which he would deliver with what I think of as the kind of the Sex Pistols sneer. He would say, "Oh well, that's very mellifluous of you," with this sort of oomph. If you're going to have a go at me for using that vocabulary, then watch out. It's is the subtext of his delivery. This is often a digression, really, but I love all of this stuff. I love hearing how people speak. I love how perhaps the soul is not buried in some deep window inside the eyes, inside some hidden antechamber of the human heart. I think the soul might be right there on the surface. We reveal it when we open our mouths and speak. I can't get out of my head Donald Trump's phrase, "We're going to win, and we're going to win bigly." But just I'm fascinated by the processes that must be at work for you to think that
that's the best line.
Bigly is even an adverb. Now, I'm not belittling him here. I really am just fascinated by the psychology behind that sentence. I mean, you could write a 20-page essay or short story on just that phrase. I think the just the insouciant ease that he'd be coining a neologism, just bringing a new word into existence without even knowing he's doing it. Or maybe he does know he's doing it, or what? It's I kind of walk through the world and I absorb my research materials, which is a fancy way of saying I watch Brian Jones having an interview in 1966 with a posh BBC interviewer guy. I experience all of this with this deep core word nerd interest in how people are saying what they are saying, what it reveals about them, or the plot synopsis or the character backstory. You don't have to put into a novel just by choosing the words, just by thinking about how someone is speaking. For starters, you're probably saying what kind of a school they went to. And you never have to discuss school. It's simply there in their use of language. So I try to bring all of this to my job, which is to give fictional characters fictional things to do.
There's an extraordinary chemistry between the four in the band, and in all the ways you just described, that we learn so much about where they're from, both because you do take us to that we see all their families, their family life in their homes, and we get the sense that, as a friend of mine said, they all think that where they come from is normal. They all think that the way they've been taught to see the world is the way the world is. And they all bring that to the way they make music. And yet together they make such perfect music. It's a beautiful analogy for family that we make, and also for the way that music can bring all those strands together and make something harmonic out of them.
Thank you. Yes, a band is a kind of a family. In an earlier version of the book that wasn't really going anywhere and felt a little bit cliche encrusted, I worked out that one of the reasons was they weren't functional enough. The temptation and the cause of least resistance is actually to have them bickering the whole time. Paul and John at their worst, or Roger Waters and David Gilmour from Pink Floyd towards the end. That's sort of the drift that the music gets made almost in spite of the disagreements in the band. But yeah, I suppose I got about 100 pages in on that version and just realised I wasn't really enjoying writing the band scenes that much. And if I'm not enjoying writing them, then even though I can't experience my novels the same way as my readers can, because obviously I write them, but I have learned to trust that instinct. If I'm not enjoying writing it, then who's going to be enjoying reading this? And so that was a signal to restart and make them a little bit more functional and more collaborative. And that got interesting. It's interesting enough making something, but then when you're making it with other people, what's going on with that? What are the costs? What are the benefits? How do you put your ego in the back seat and get to put the seatbelt on?
As I mentioned before, and it's something that people love about your work, that characters are kind of connected to each other. They're interconnected often from story to story within one novel, but also from novel to novel. And so there's a kind of this way of looking at how tiny coincidences affect other people, or how actions can affect other people. And in Utopia Avenue, you take that's kind of turned up to 11, to use the musical pun, because they are all having an effect on each other. They're having an effect on the kind of the way they write, the kinds of things they write, the things they experience. So there's a kind of a collective consciousness that you explore in Utopia Avenue. But even more than that, one of the things that I really responded to was that there's a kind of creative consciousness. And I feel like that's maybe the reason it's set in the 60s, in a time that we all know was a period, late 60s, of enormous explosion of musical kind of dialogue and expression. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that idea that people who are in the same place, on the same plane, at the same time, influence each other.
I can try, Michaela. Yes, they do. We can see it. We can see Sergeant Pepper's being released on 1st of June 1967, and suddenly, throughout the rest of the year, fairly mediocre 3-star in terms of Amazon review, 3-star bands put out 4-star albums, or 4-star albums with 5-star passages in them. Roger Waters, I think, is on record as saying Pink Floyd were traveling to a gig somewhere over a large distance. The whole album was played by some pirate DJ, and they pulled over. Never mind they were going to be late for the gig. They pulled over to listen, and at the end of it, Roger Waters just said, "The bastards." That the bastardsness is partly behind creative surges that come out of one given milieu. It's actually envy and a sense that you want to outdo the other, and this cascades, and everyone's envious, and everyone's trying to do something more creative and more unusual, and and more left field and more unexpected, and it can't last long. It does burn itself out, but while it lasts, some great things happen. And 67, 68 was just one of those volcanoes. So I guess that's a sort of cultural history answer. Same thing happens within a band. You know that because they write books and they say so. McCartney does Let It Be, and Lennon thinks, right, I'll show you, and writes Across the Universe. McCartney does Lady Madonna, piano riff driven glory, and Lennon responds with Hey Bulldog, and they feed each other. They'd work. It's this peculiar and gorgeous balance between competitiveness and collaboration. They not only competed, but actually helped each other make their songs better as well. I found it a little bit with screenwriting. As a novelist, you are a solo act. You're a solo singer-songwriter, or analogous to. There's only one person making the myriad of decisions from micro to macro, from and we're going to put a comma here or a semicolon in here, all the way up to, well, what's the next book going to be about then? It's only you answering all of those questions and everything in between. In a band, or when you're screenwriting, you can throw a half-baked idea into the pit, and it emerges 3/4 of an hour later as something fully formed and gorgeous, and better than it could have been if you'd just worked on it yourself. You have to leave your ego at the door, but if everyone is there with the same attitude and has the same mission statement of being there purely in service of trying to make the script as good as it possibly can be, then it's just a joy. And it's bigger than you are and better than you are.
One of my favorite characters in Utopia Avenue is Jasper. And he's someone who sees social interactions and emotional exchanges with people through a kind of a distant lens, that emotions don't really make sense to him. He's also the guitar god in Utopia Avenue, and he may or may not be suffering from serious psychosis. I wanted to ask you to read a speech that he gives, which is on page 494.
Sure.
And then I'm going to ask you a question about him. But his speech, this is a really pivotal speech. Could you read that for us?
Sure. Jasper's in a press conference, and he says this. Well, this is in answer to the question, can songs change the world? Songs do not change the world, declares Jasper. People do. People pass laws, riot, hear God, and act accordingly. People invent, kill, make babies, start wars. Jasper lights a Marlboro. Which begs a question. Who or what influences the minds of the people who change the world? My answer is ideas and feelings. Which begs a question. Where do ideas and feelings originate? My answer is others. One's heart and mind, the press, the arts, stories, last but not least, songs. Songs like dandelion seeds, billowing across space and time. Who knows where they'll land or what they'll bring? Jasper leans into the mic and without a whisper of self-consciousness, sings a miscellany of single lines from 9 or 10 songs, which I won't do for you. Dean recognises It's All Right, Ma, I'm Only Bleeding, Strange Fruit, The Trail of the Lonesome Pine. Others Dean can't identify, but the hard-boiled press pack look on. Nobody laughs, nobody scoffs, cameras click. Where will these song seeds land, says Jasper. It's the parable of the sower. Often, usually, they land on barren soil and don't take root. But sometimes they land in a mind that is ready, is fertile. And what happens then? Feelings and ideas happen. Joy, solace, sympathy, assurance, cathartic sorrow. The idea that life could be and should be better than this. An invitation to slip into someone else's skin for a little while. If a song plants an idea or a feeling in a mind, it has already changed the world.
It's one of my favourite sections of the book. I wanted to ask you if you're welcome to tell us a bit about Jasper, and in particular why you gave him those words. Why did they need to come from him in the book? Somebody who sort of observes everything with such detachment.
Well, Jasper, certainly if he was around now, he would get an Asperger's diagnosis really quickly. But that was less a thing back then. So everyone just thinks he's a bit odd. He does have an interesting relationship with reality. Either he is living with schizophrenia, and a manifestation of that is character who constantly makes a knocking sound in his head, a bit like Edgar Allan Poe's Telltale Heart, as if there's this thing that's trying to knock its way through a partition between wherever it is and Jasper's conscious mind, or as he occasionally thinks he's not schizophrenic and he's not, in inverted commas, crazy, but that is really there and it really is happening, and it's one of the resolutions of the book. Which is partly dependent on another book of mine that you may or may not have read, which of the interpretations of that is the true one, more inverted commas. Jasper needs to say what he just said because who else could it be, really? Dean just doesn't talk like that. Dean isn't from a background where you can talk about dreamy ideas. Elf is too grounded and Griff, the drummer, is from Yorkshire, and a
That's
Yorkshire
answer
guy in the '60s just doesn't say that. So only Jasper has the lack of social awareness that would tell him you just can't say that kind of thing in a press conference in front of, or you can't start singing lines. It simply isn't done. Jasper lacks the neural wiring to tell him what simply is or simply isn't done. So out he comes with it. He's a useful character for me from that point of view. I don't have to do the Johnny Rotten sneer. He can think it and say it, and sometimes, as happens to people with Asperger's, or maybe their most famous filmic avatar, Data, the android from the Star Trek universe. There are consequences. There's a price to be paid for this lack of an editor between the thought that says say this and actually saying it. Yet Jasper takes the blows, and he and also receives the altered perception when people think about who and what he is because of how he speaks.
There's something as well I thought about, maybe Jasper representing the way that some artists and art just go to the heart of things. They say the things. They don't have the same filter, or they don't feel constrained by the same filter. And I think the book plays around with that idea a lot. Jasper's a very interesting character as well. He's a kind of a gateway in this novel between this kind of traditional novel we've got about a world of music in the late 60s and this other world that you alluded to, that Jasper's other kind of, these are the worlds that exist in some of your other books as well, this sort of alternative reality of supernatural threat and of predator and prey. And I feel like I wondered if you could talk a bit about that other alternative reality and why that's something that you love to explore. What does that other kind of space allow you to play around with, that other supernatural reality?
What's real? Is it supernatural? Probably a majority of human beings in the world would believe in some form of life after death. For the ones who don't, this is supernatural, medieval mumbo jumbo stuff. For the ones who do, it's simply future colors on the existential spectrum that our current eyeballs cannot see. Who's right? Who's wrong? So it allows me to play around. I might aggrandize that verb a little bit. It allows me to spend time in, or explore, or just think about, or use the novel as a laboratory to study this question of the relativity of truth. That is not a niche thing. The direction of our species is being decided by this. Whose narrative of truth is the real one? Should you wear a mask? Shouldn't you? Is everything that Greta Thunberg stands for some wacko eco green religion, or is it a thundering juggernaut that's heading straight for us, and the rest of us are responding to it by saying, no, that's not a juggernaut. No, that's not going to hit us. No, it's all a conspiracy. No, this stuff is it's everything, isn't it? These elements of the book, which might seem unreal, and which I would agree in some cases they are not in my personal orbit of actual or objectively truthful either. Yet nonetheless they matter. And as it happens, I mean, they're good colours for a novel as well. I suppose what I'm trying to say, not very succinctly, is that I like looking at something from an angle of incidence that you could call its opposite. So to look at mortality, which is an undeniable thing. How about from the viewpoint of immortals? How would they see it? Is that going to be interesting? And I find often it is, at least it interests me. Or Jasper, he's there as we are. We have just our brief blink, a brief little spark of existence with all the darkness before and all the darkness of non-existence afterwards. We're alive for such a short time. I believe we are. But how about looking at that short time from the perspective of a consciousness that isn't, one that's there for a lot longer? I don't want to give anything away in the book too much because people are still reading for it. But what if Jasper's knock, 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 knock isn't psychosis, but some kind of sentient ancestral curse? How about our ancestors? In your opening speech, you referred to peoples who would have a different perspective on ancestors to maybe what we could call a mainstream Western perspective, for want of a better name, but there isn't one yet, so that's what I've got to use. How about if not just metaphorically, our ancestors are somehow with us, or genetically, our ancestors are somehow with us? So it's maybe I'm floundering a little bit, but it's something of an attitude. In literary terms, this angle of incidence it has to be launched from genre. It takes you away from, as it happens, what is acceptable to a New York Times reviewer. You're coming at it not from genre, not from mainstream literary objective realism, which I find a little bit stifling. But from something actually that genre has been doing forever, for thousands of years. And let's remember that what we now call genre was around long before the realist novel was ever happening. So that's a bit of a rambly, unfocused answer, but I like the question because I've never really been asked to think about it before. So you're getting it raw and unrefined and unpolished.
Very good. I think when I spoke to people in the lead up to speaking with you, people who'd read a lot of your books, none of them used that phrase that I was trying to reach at. And I deliberately used the phrase alternative reality because I didn't want to give stuff away about what Jasper might be experiencing if people haven't read that book yet. But I think a lot of people who are watching probably have read a number of your books. And I think what's so extraordinary about your writing is that every character feels real. Every character feels true wherever they are, whether they're immortal or whether they're a horologist or whether they are a person, booking a band in 1968. And that's I think part of what people respond to so much. And the genre bending stuff, I wondered as well in Utopia Avenue as an aside, whether all these debates that go on in the band about, are we turning our back too much on folk? That's Elf's problem. And are we blues enough? And are we too jazz? All these kind of genre conversations in music, for me, I wonder if they stood in as a kind of the debate that we have in literature about what genre is acceptable and what's highbrow enough and what's too highbrow.
Yes is the answer, and maybe even more self-indulgently, the band can be seen as me. For whom genre, for me, it's just another line of colours in the paint box that are available. And to say, no, I'm not having a ghost. I'm not having a voice. I'm not having a disembodied being. I'm not having a dragon. I'm not having a door that takes you to somewhere it shouldn't take you to according to the rules of the physical world. I'm not having a sentient curse that can travel down a bloodline and slowly accrete or reacquire its consciousness and a desire for revenge. Not having that in my book. That's like kind of an artist saying, not having purple on my canvas. No room for purples here. No mauves, no purples, no indigos. Nope.
In those other
and
worlds, in those spaces as well. I mean, you've mentioned this in other conversations you've had, but those themes you keep coming back to about, you know, causality and power, or fate and fatalism, or prey and predator, they're writ so large in those other, for want of a better word, those supernatural worlds. We get such a strong sense of what's at stake. And we feel that all in our own lives, in our day-to-day lives. We just don't often get the chance to express it with that kind of extremeness.
it's true. It's true. A boss may not have fanged teeth, a Transylvanian accent, and sleep in a coffin, but a boss can still be a vampire.
Yes.
I think if you're working in the fulfillment center of a large online retailer, then I think you still feel like you've had your blood sucked out of you at the end of a shift. So maybe that's one reason stories work. They restage what we're feeling anyway. They rewrite or remix our lives in a more handleable size, and maybe with more black and white, kind of less murky roles. It's not reality, but it can help us to see it. When life, as existence is an infinite variety of greys, and sometimes time spent with narratives where things are a little bit more black and white, they help you understand the greys a bit better. Maybe that's why that's one reason why we read.
A couple of questions before we go to the audience questions. I heard that in the past, when you were a child, you used to draw maps. You were
Yeah.
a fan of, not of necessarily of writing novels as a young child, but you'd spend hours and hours and hours making maps. What did that show you about how your mind worked? Why were you a lover of maps and creating your own as a child?
I'm still not sure if there is a better answer to that than Neil Gaiman's answer, which is, well, because I'm me. It's not flippant. It's you know, what could a talking microscope tell you about microscopes? That they can show you all sorts of things, but they're not very good, I would bet, at giving you a rundown of the optics of how a microscope works. So I'm not altogether sure about the why, but it's still a valid question that I like to think about, because those maps, it revealed that same breathless whoosh of that I feel when there's a blank space to be filled in, when nothing is yet flawed by the fact of my having started it. That's true at the beginning, but now these days, even when I go on and I am either metaphorically filling in the blank or writing a manuscript, it might be messy and it might be going wrong here, and that relationship isn't working there, and I've got to do something about that scene. But nonetheless, I still feel that same whoosh that you get when you're making something, and it's like music. I can't really express it. When my daughter was about, I just remember that she just started to walk, so about a year old, I guess. And I just remember we were living in England in a fairly nondescript road, and walking down the end of the drive with her, which was until then had been the extent of her world, pretty much. And we just turned the corner and there was like a hedge, and then there was this view off into the distance, and it was the first time she realized that there's such a thing as distance in the world. And I just remember her sort of stepping back and kind of eyes wide, and if I could have inserted a thought bubble and written it, I would have said, my God, this place is enormous. This world is so big and it's so full of stuff. And I felt that when I was a kid, with this big sheet of artists' A1 size mounted cartridge paper to fill up. I was a very low maintenance kid, and I still kind of feel it when I begin and when I'm in a novel. This is so big, and it's so full of possibility and potential. And I want to interact with it and be in it and be the subject and the object at the same time. And just whatever I am, whatever kind of a Faustian pact this is, sign me up. I will swap what I am for a world that I make. And I've forgotten completely what the question was. I don't know how the hell I got there, but there we go.
I think it would be remiss of me not to ask you quickly about Australia, because Australia and Australians pop up in a number of your books over the years. And I wondered whether it was because of a sort of impression that Australia made on you, because I know you have been here over the years. You've been a guest at Adelaide Writers Festival and Perth Writers Festival and other places. Why does Australia pop up? Why is it a source of, I know that you write about lots of places, but what is it particularly? One of the academics I read before we got to speak says that when considered together, your works create a vision of Australia as an uncanny place.
That's interesting. Australia doesn't come terribly well out of Utopia Avenue in the form of Bruce, who's a bit of a cad. He's sort of the main Australian character. So Australia, if you're listening, I owe you a really good character. And well, there's next time around,
Esther pretty good.
Yeah, she's great. I mean, she's not really in this novel. Afra Booth, the academic, is sort of the feminist academic. She's right and merit worthy much more often than she isn't as well. So I guess there's a bit of balance there. But as you can see, I'm evading the question. Australia. I'm sure I'm not alone in being an old world formed person who thinks of Australia and probably romanticizes about Australia as this space, this opposite of Europe, familiar in some ways around the fringes. Melbourne can feel very like, I don't know, Cheltenham or Christchurch can feel rather like, I know that's New Zealand, but if there's, it can feel like Oxford with newer buildings, but it still can feel like that. So it's both. So it's the combination of the utterly unfamiliar and the occasionally, maybe more than occasionally, somewhat known. Still isn't a good answer.
That's all right. I thought it was fair enough to ask, but we can happily move on. I wanted to take a moment to say that if for people who are watching now, if they have any questions they want to put to David Mitchell, feel free to pop them in the YouTube chat or in Facebook Messenger chat if you're watching on Facebook through the Brisbane Writers Festival page, and we'll definitely put them to David before our time is up. Maybe we'll move on then.
I just want, if I may, I just want to bounce back to one memory. If we're lucky, we have a few magic nights in our lives. We have a handful of magic holidays and a few magic nights. And one of my life's top 5 magic nights with my then girlfriend, now wife, traveling from wherever the Garn starts, which is Adelaide, I think, to Alice. And it was just one night. For whatever reason, we got bumped up from a backpacker's basic into a nice carriage of our own, and I just remember traveling across the desert. It was a full moon. It was like something from a film. It's just one of my magic nights, and those nights, they have an effect on you, and they do something to you, and you never forget them. And if you happen to be a writer, it's not that you're always thinking of them and they're always there, but the compound of those experiences are never absent either, not entirely absent. It's just and just when the membrane and the interface between this world and whatever other worlds there might be, metaphorical or hey, cosmic, or emotional. That membrane is so thin it's not even there anymore. You can't live like that, otherwise you're too much like Jasper in trouble. But just for a while, just occasionally, just now and then, if that happens to you, then it's a great blessing. And I owe Australia that, and maybe this is why Australia's it's not always there. I'm not an Australian novelist. I have no unique insight into the depth and the antechambers and the entirety of Australia, but it's not never there either. That's it.
I've got a question now from someone in our audience. I want to put it to you. Question from Peter, who says, one of the many things I enjoy about your novels is how you weave in characters from previous books. How do you decide which characters are placed where? Is there a master plan?
No, there's no master plan, Peter. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I don't have the planet-sized brain I would need for a master plan, and I don't have crime scene investigation type case room full of maps and plans and things. It's more organic than that. It's partly dependent on amnesia. If I haven't forgotten a character, then there's probably some reason for that. I think of it like being a corporation having vacancies to fill. I advertise in-house first. If there's someone from accounts or personnel from the post room, or maybe a retiring director who might want to fill that place, and if I can bring something interesting, and if the chronology fits, then I'll offer them the job. If not, then I'll get off my backside and work out a new character with a new backstory and a new set of everything, I suppose. So that's it, really. Thanks for your question.
I've got another question coming in, but I also felt as well that when a novelist like you gives us characters that we love, we feel like they live on. They live on for us when the book, they have a kind of a realness, a concreteness to us, and they live on beyond the book. And so we imagine them. So it's an extra gift from an author that you then tell us what happened to them 20 years later. Or you tell us that when the car went off the bridge, they didn't really die. All those kinds of experiences for the reader are an extra gem.
I know exactly what you're saying. I'm a reader too, remember, and that afterlife effect you feel is something I also feel, and maybe my habit of metalapsis, if I can use a word like that at this time of day, this reoccurring of characters of the same character between different artistic units, in my case novels, is some kind of response to that feeling that I feel too.
Beautiful. Question from Teddy: would you ever think of working on a graphic novel where you have both the words and the pictures that could complement each other?
Got a lot of respect for graphic novels. Some of my best friends are graphic novelists. It doesn't reach out and grab me, because I'm aware of the formidable skill set I would need to acquire to do it well. I know there are rules behind their composition that I would have to learn and start as a beginner on. However, that's exactly the reason why it also reaches out and grabs me. That's quite attractive when I put it like that. I've done some work in film to learn what film writers know about narrative that novelists don't. And why not, actually? Why not think about a sabbatical at some point? I mean, my in tray is full, and I'm afraid of putting anything else in it. My agent will kill me when he finds out what I've already agreed to, without talking about graphic novels. But that's a reason to do it, to find out what graphic novelists know about narrative that I don't. So yeah, I've actually talked myself into that. Maybe, yes. Let's move on before I commit myself to anything else. Thanks for the question.
Yeah. We do have time for a few more questions from our audience. So if you do want to ask David something, now is your moment. In the meantime, I want to quickly ask you, David, about your ideas about time. I feel like when you talked before about all the components of a novel, there's structure and genre and all those things, that time is something it's another very strong element of how you write. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you've come to think about that as a kind of a pillar in your books, because you play around with time really brilliantly, both from story to story and within each individual story.
Wow. Yeah, I'll try. Time, like St. Augustine said, I understand exactly what it is until someone asks me to try and talk about it, and then I've got no idea. I doubt St. Augustine used that very language, but I think that was the gist of what he said. I suppose there's time point and time span. There's the point is all novels need a when, all art needs a when. Is that true? Narratives need a when, even if it's specific non-specificity, even if it's once upon a time, or even if it's in a distant galaxy long, long ago. Generally, however, though, there are a little bit more, novels tend to be a little bit more specific than that, not always. So you choose a when, you need a when whether you like it or not. Then once you've got a starting point or an ending point, you need a parabola, you need a trajectory, you need a sequence of nows between the past and the present and the future of the narrative. And I suppose you can write a perfectly good narrative not really thinking about this too much. As it happens, I'm interested in it. And many of the things I really admire are also written by people who think about it. I've become a little bit obsessed by Better Call Saul, you know, the Netflix show, the prequel to Breaking Bad, and I love the gay abandonment with which it uses backflash and forward flash and things which I suppose in old school creative writing classes there I think was an idea around that a backflash was kind of it was like parentheses, a bit of a confession that you don't have the discipline to do it properly, to do it in a more disciplined way. Not Breaking Bad, and I guess things that it has evolved from, but I pick on Breaking Bad specifically because it's so good. It does it so well. It's not at all embarrassed about having a whole episode set in Jim McGill's past. It also does this thing. It has black and white backflashes, so we thought, where Jimmy/Saul is working in some god-awful American mall in some nowhere county, and there's no windows. You can't even see what's outside, what time of year it is. And he's working in some sort of donut concession after he's been relocated by the vacuum cleaner guy. I always thought it was a backflash, but I've only just caught on that it's a forward flash. It's going into the future. Gorgeous. I love all of that. It's how clever. That is an example of the fruits of thinking about time differently.
I
suppose I want to say that.
Yeah, I think I asked.
Just
sorry, you go, David.
Just super quickly, a character is the sum of the character's relationships with other characters. We talked about language, also a relationship, or maybe a matrix of 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 relationships with abstract nouns, or not so abstract, but with sexuality and gender, with death and the end, with money and poverty. What do the characters think about these things? What are they afraid of with respect to these things? And I think added fairly recently onto this list is, what is a relationship's character with time? Just think about that for a little bit. Do they think about it no more than a fish thinks about water? Or are they more analytical than that? Are they going through life with an account book of things they've achieved, things they've yet to achieve? Are they going through life with a notary with an insurance notary, or sorry, an insurance actuary table? Are they working out their statistical odds of making it through the next year? What's their relationship with time? That's good to think about. And I like to, do they think, as most of us do, kind of time as a river, as a line? Do they think of an autistic friend of mine who thinks about time, or for whom time is a field of dots, where a memory of something 3 or 13 years ago is just as bright, just as vivid as something that happened 3 seconds or 3 minutes ago, which he says is why autistic people can sometimes burst into hysterical laughter at something hilarious that happened all those years ago, because it's as if it happened just now. Likewise, some less welcome emotions as well. But so yes, to get a fully rounded character, I kind of like to think that I need to work out what their relationship with time is. Over. Huge rambling answer. Sorry, back to you.
No, it's what you said before when I asked you about alternative realities, and you said, what is reality? I mean, that's at the heart of time. As I think you've said this before, we can't talk about time without talking about consciousness. So there's a kind of interrelationship between the two of them.
Well, deep. It's all it's like the final passage of Kubrick's 2001, and of course, space and time is literally the same thing. They are indivisible.
I'm going to ask you one more question from an audience member before we finish, because we're almost out of time. I know.
I think you better had.
Scott says, without spoiling the end of Utopia Avenue, are you able to tell us if you've introduced any characters who are planned to appear in your next novel?
Oh, nice one, Scott.
Nice one. I thought we had to get that in before we finish.
Yeah. Clever you. There's some likely contenders. I'm doing some short stories next, before I start on something chunky again, just to give some fugitive short stories I've written a bit of a home, and to add, I will be remixing them, but also to add probably 12 to the 8 that I want to give a home to. And I think there'll be people from Utopia Avenue who will be one or two of the protagonists in the still not yet written short stories. But there is one, and I'll give you for the next chunky novel, I think. I might change the order, but the answer is the stamp. Look really closely at the stamps on the postcards that I've reproduced. They aren't in the proof, Michaela, so you won't have seen them, but in the finished product, when a character writes a postcard, I actually like to go to the trouble of finding a blank postcard. You can do this via eBay these days, and getting hold of a postcard they would have sent, and getting hold of the stamps that they would have needed to have put on it. And when Dean writes this postcard at the end of Utopia Avenue, I found some contemporary stamps. I think that's upside down.
Fantastic.
So if, Scott, you look very closely at one of those stamps, you will see a character who will be a major character in the next chunky novel I write. Good luck.
Well, I have to say now, unfortunately, we have run out of time, but thank you, David Mitchell, for all of those ideas and talking to us in such depth across so many of your novels today.
It's really been my pleasure. I'd like to thank everyone watching this from home as well. And it's an odd thing to be doing. We aren't all in the same space, but in a sense we are. This is a part of the new.
Exactly.
And the new normal. So hopefully see you next time. Thank you, Michaela. And Dan, the tech
I just wanted to say
as well,
that the Brisbane Writers Festival has more online events, so please keep your eyes open for the next ones that are planned. And while these events are free, you can make a tax-deductible donation if you'd like to support future events. And if you enjoyed tonight's conversation, please do spread the word. But for now, thank you very much for being part of this Brisbane Writers Festival event. Have a good day, a good evening. Thank you, and stay safe.